Okay, hello guys again for part two of plant transport. So we've been talking about the transport of water and minerals versus sugars and amino acids. Water is always taken up in the roots, it's transported through the stem, and it's transported into the leaves, and then it's lost again through the leaves. Plants take up a lot of water, and you know that some of the water is used in photosynthesis, but that's actually really little. So a lot is lost again, and that happens in the leaves, and we shall see how. The other path through the tree is that of sugars. So sugars are always moved from where they are produced to where they are used. As I said in part one, usually they're produced by the leaves and then they have to be transported to the rest of the plants. But sometimes when, in times of need, such as the winter, the plant stores sugars in its roots, and then when it needs them, it needs to transport those sugars out of the roots and into, say, young leaves. We have a way of calling these organs where the sugar is produced, and we call them the source. And where the sugars are used is called the sink. Like I said, in the spring and summer, the leaves are the source, and in the autumn and winter, the roots are the source of the sugars. So two different paths, the path of water and minerals, always up, 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 and the path of sugars, and in the same way amino acids, the building block of proteins. Amino acids are always transported from source to sink, but where the source is located and where the sink is located will vary from one season to the next. So here again, you've got the little pencil, so if you do have the time and your biology exercise book in front of you, why not copy this? Alright, so then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the uptake of water. So the uptake, like we said, happens in the roots and via specialized cells, which you will also hopefully remember, which are called the root hair cells. And water is taken up through a process called osmosis, which you also have already learned about. And then you know that osmosis, if you think of the definition of osmosis, you will hopefully remember that it's the movement of water from an area of high water potential to an area of low water potential down the water potential gradient. So in order to move water through a tree, the water will need to follow a water potential gradient. So from high to low water potential. The water potential is highest outside the roots, so the water will then flow into the root hair cells. And then the next place where the water will then go is the stem. So you can make a conclusion that in the stem, the water potential is lower than in the roots. So the water will then flow from the roots into the stem. Likewise, in the leaves, the water potential is yet again lower than in the stem. That's why the water will flow into the leaves. And then I told you that the water leaves the leaves again. It leaves the leaves. And that happens because the water potential in the outside air is even lower than in the plant. So basically you have a movement of the water along a water potential gradient, and the water goes from the roots. I'm going to draw a little arrow here. Up through roots, stem, leaves, and then into the air. So the water potential is highest in the soil, so that means that the water will enter the roots, and it is lowest. So I'm going to try and write on here that the water potential is highest at the bottom and lowest there, and so the water will flow along that water potential gradient. And if that sounds really abstract to you, remember our little slide. So I'm going to draw a slide here, like that, and this is where the water potential is highest, and the water will follow this water potential gradient down to where it is lowest. So it's like going down a slide, and the water goes down the slide, and in this case actually we've got the roots at the top of the slide and the air outside the leaves at the bottom of the slide. So the water goes into the roots, up the stem, although I'm going down the slide, it's a little bit anti-intuitive, and then into the leaves and into the outside air. That is the movement of the water. So from the root hair cells, where the water enters through osmosis, the water will then go into the root cortex cells. From the root cortex cells, so the root cortex cells are these guys here, yeah? So down here, this is a root hair cell, yeah? This is a root hair cell. This is another root hair cell. And then these little cells here, this is a xylem vessel, which hopefully you will already recognize. And then the cells that I'm going to circle in blue here, like here, those are the cortex cells, so they're relatively undifferentiated cells that we find in the root, and the water needs to cross those to get into the xylem vessels. From the xylem vessels, the water will then, it'll stay there first in the xylem of the root and then in the xylem of the tree, and then it'll go all the way up the tree and into the leaves. And in the leaf, the water passes out of the xylem vessels and into the surrounding cells called the mesophyll cells, which we know already because we have talked about the structure of the leaf. In the mesophyll cells, water is then used in metabolic reactions, in particular photosynthesis, or any water that isn't used, it diffuses through the stomata. And you know what the stomata, they're the little gaps at the bottom of the leaf that connect the inside of the leaf with the outside, and I've called them the gas exchange entry and exit points. So the water will exit through there. Any water that isn't used will exit through there. In the same way that the water goes up, mineral ions are transported with the water through the xylem. Right, let's have a closer look at the uptake of water by the root hair cells. Now you know that when water moves in via osmosis, it can only go one way, meaning from where there's a lot of water to where there is less water. A lot of water to less water. Now, we want the water to go this way, and the cell wants the water to go this way. So it needs, somehow, it needs to have a lower water potential inside the cell than outside the cell. Yeah, it needs to maintain these conditions. The water potential needs to be higher outside and lower inside. How can the cell achieve that? Now remember, when the water potential is low, the solute concentration is high. Yeah, so I'm going to write SC if I can. It's a little bit complicated. So solute concentration needs to be high, remember? And so that means that the solute concentration on the outside needs to be low. When the solute concentration is high, the water potential is low. When the solute concentration is low, the water potential is high. So these are the conditions we need. Now, how can we achieve that? How can we make the solute concentration to be higher on the inside than on the outside? Well, this is where active transport comes in. So the plant is going to actively transport mineral ions into its cytoplasm. Yeah, so mineral ions are transported in with active transport, and hopefully you remember that active means that it costs the plant cell energy. It has to spend energy in the form of ATP on this. So I'm just going to write ATP. It's costly. So the plant transports in mineral ions. Now that it has done that, the solute concentration is indeed higher inside than outside. Hopefully that is logical. So what happens? Water will follow automatically. Yeah, so water goes in a second step. Water enters the plant. I'm sorry, my writing isn't terribly pretty, but there you are. So water moves inside the plant cell because now, after transporting in the mineral ions, the water potential is lower inside than outside. What is that process called by which water moves in? Hopefully everybody knows this by now. Yeah, it's not active transport, it's not diffusion, it's that last one, it's osmosis. Osmosis, which is the movement of water from an area of higher water potential to an area of lower water potential. All right, now you see the pencil symbol? this is the time to stop the video and take notes in your exercise book. And if you're really motivated, you could even try to copy the little drawing that I've made. But if you just write what I've written, that will be fine. Next question is, how are root hair cells adapted to do their job? Remember that we've learned that specialized cells are usually very good at doing what they're doing because they're adapted. So the root hair cells has various adaptations. First of all, it has this really long structure here, which basically increases its surface area. More surface area means that it can do a better job of importing mineral ions and water. The more surface area, the more water and mineral ions can be imported. You will also notice maybe that in these prolongations the cell walls are quite thin, compared to here where they are relatively thick. But in these protrusions the cell walls are relatively thin, which means that the path that the water has to cross and that the mineral ions have to cross to get in is quite short. So here is another slide for you to copy with a little pencil sign. One adaptation is the large surface area, which increases the rate of absorption of water by osmosis and also that of ions by active transport. Then it has a thin cell wall, which means that there is a short path of, actually it should say osmosis and not diffusion. And finally, this is not shown on the previous slide, but they are very, very numerous on young roots, so there's a lot of them, and that also increases the surface area. Right, so here's the path of the water, a little overview over the path of the water. So we've just learned that water moves into the root by osmosis, and that's after mineral ions have been pumped into the root by active transport. And then we said the water goes from the root hair cell through the cortex cells this way into the xylem vessel, and the xylem vessel, that's first the one in the root, and then it gets pulled into the xylem, pulled up the xylem. So here at some point we're not in the root anymore, we're in the stem. So here we're in the stem, and then it goes into the leaf, and in the leaf it will go into the surrounding cells, but the water that is sort of left over in gaseous form, so I'm just going to draw little points here representing the water molecules, they will diffuse out of the stomata. Now you say, why does it diffuse? Why is that not osmosis? It's not osmosis because here, at this point in the stoma, we don't have a cell membrane. Remember that osmosis, and I think I forgot actually myself to say that in my previous definition, but osmosis is the movement of water from an area of high water potential to an area of low water potential across a semi-permeable membrane, and we don't have that here. So this is diffusion, it's not osmosis. Water molecules can, strangely enough, also diffuse. Okay, so here you've got the whole path of the water from the root hair cells through the cortex into the xylem vessels, up the stem or the tree trunk, into the leaves, into the surrounding cells of the mesophyll, and any leftover water will leave the leaf through the stomata. And that is called evaporation, of course, because now we have gaseous water, and in the plant the process of the water leaving is also called transpiration. So if you're French speaking, that sounds a lot like transpiration, and of course it's a similar concept, but in English transpiration is a very specific process in plant cells. Now, question, how does water actually get from the roots to the xylem? Well, it turns out that as water climbs up the xylem into the leaves, we said it goes into the leaves and ultimately it follows a water potential gradient, but of course it needs to be replaced. Anything that is, all the water molecules that go up the xylem need to be replaced from somewhere. And it turns out they're being replaced from the cortex cells. So as water climbs up the xylem, it is replaced by water from the root. And as water leaves the root, it is replaced by water from the soil, which moves in via osmosis, as we have learned.